Hello.
Hi there, Chris Thomas.
Hi, it's good to meet you, Rob.
And you. First off, before we start on all the questions and everything, what I want to say is this is new for me, totally, because you're a musician. I've interviewed directors, I've interviewed cast, I've interviewed screenwriters. All this thanks to lockdown, believe it or not. I may be about the only person in the world who's saying, thank God for this pandemic. I've been I've been locked down, and because of that, I've been able to do all this online stuff. So I'm really quite chuffed with it. But you're the first musician, composer, musician for films. Is there a term for that?
Film composer, yeah.
That'll do it. So, yeah, you're the first person who is a musician who I've managed to get to speak to. So it's really quite thrilling because I still remember now, a long time ago, I must have been about 5 or 6. So you're talking about early 60s. And I was given a Beatles guitar with a kind of stencil of the Beatles on it. And I remember thinking, I can't get this to work. I can't press the strings lightly enough to change the notes. I didn't realise you had to press harder. And I can't help but thinking that if I'd known that then. So in the end, I mean, that was one of the things I was going to do over lockdown was learn to play the guitar. Brought the guitar down for a bit, managed to snap the third string up 8 times trying to tune it and gave up. So that's gone back upstairs anyway. So my interest in music is as someone who appreciates it and enjoys it, but can't actually produce it in any way, shape or form. So I'd like to ask you, what got you into music?
Well, I guess before we get to that, I have to say that I think the most interesting interviews I've ever had are from people who aren't used to asking the usual run-of-the-mill questions. In fact, because you'll come at things from a very different place, and I often have these very therapeutic, kind of deep-reaching in, and like I normally don't get to explore some of the areas that you'll probably go, and often I end up discovering interesting things about myself and my music through these conversations rather than the standard, like asking the usual safe musician questions. And so I actually really look forward to being interviewed by non-musicians. This is actually a good thing for me. I'm actually kind of excited to see where we go.
Oh, well, I hope I don't disappoint you.
Yeah.
Anyway, so as I said, what got you into music? I mean, I approached music and failed, got battered away, and, just appreciate it as a user, I suppose. How did you get into it as a musician?
Yeah, I was really lucky to grow up in a musical house. My parents were both musicians.
Yeah.
And, most composers I know tend to become composers despite growing up in a house where they're trying to talk them out of going into music. Where I was growing up, often the conversation is, you're smart enough to be a doctor. Why don't you do it? And my parents, it was more like, this is a thing you can do. We know where the traps are. We know what we could have done better. We have knowledge to pass on to you. And they said, if you want to do this, that's okay. We'll support that. And they understood that a music career was more than just, you become the Beatles or nobody, or in my case, you become John Williams or you're nothing. They understood that in music, there's a big infrastructure in the industry, and I may end up somewhere in it. Maybe not as a composer for a film, but maybe I could be a successful audio engineer or a conductor, an orchestrator. There's opportunity. And so I was never discouraged from doing it.
Oh, brilliant.
So I guess that's how I started, was I just had support and influence at home.
So at what point then from that did you realise that you wanted to be a composer, and specifically a composer for film music?
Yeah, I remember being a second grader when I discovered Beethoven. And that's when I decided I wanted to play music forever. So I started piano. And by 5th grade, I mean, this was all early for me. I was, 10, 12 years old when I think, it was maybe 12-ish when I realized I heard music in my head that I realized wasn't pre-existing. I was generating my own thoughts, like when I would write a story for school. I had these original musical ideas, and around that point is when I began to discover the films of Alfred Hitchcock and Fellini, Truffaut, and some of the classics. And I just had this taste for those movies, and I realized there was a lot of really hot contemporary films out at the time, and I just wasn't gravitating to them. Something about the sound from the soundtracks in these classic films pulled me in. And so around that time I decided, I think my love of film and music can be one and the same. And maybe instead of just pursuing concert music, I think I want to work with the motion picture industry. And very early in life, I decided that's probably the direction I'll go. It was cinema that I was attracted to, but music was the only thing I was good at. So,
well, of all the things to be good at, it's quite a good one, isn't it?
Yeah, no complaints.
No, well, quite. So, do you think the composer liking or disliking a film affects their scores for the film? Do you have to enjoy the film to write a good score?
I would say it helps. It really helps motivate you to dig a little deeper. I've been in films where I really liked the film, but I was caught in a war zone from, like network to producers to the filmmaker. Nobody could agree on what they wanted from me.
Right.
And each party threatened to throw me off if I didn't do it their way. And so there's just another lesson for future film composers out there. You spend a lot of your time negotiating politics for these kinds of things. But it does help to fall in love with something about the film that speaks personally to you, because then you're able to really reach in to that part of yourself and pull something special out. But I've written scores I was very proud of for movies that I knew weren't particularly strong, because there was something very personal I could find in it.
Yeah. Right. Still on the obviously on the subject of films and music, what genres do you think of films are the most challenging to compose music for?
Oh, easy. Comedy and animation.
Yeah.
Anything animated or any sort of comedy. Those are exhausting. The movie like Haymaker that I was just working on.
Yeah.
Time stretches really far, and so I could pull the tempo back, and for every beat that goes by, a lot of picture goes by. So when you're dealing in drama, you get to space your thoughts out. You can write just a little more musically. You can have a long melody, things that are very natural to a composer. Animation and comedy, the movie's just chop, 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 chop. The edit is flying by, and you have to stop and acknowledge all the little physical things that happen. You can't just let everything run by. You have to really stay on the edit. And so that means your tempo has to be just lightning fast. So instead of these broad, out of Africa, John Barry style soundtracks, now you're at like 160 beats per minute, tick, 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 just to catch all the cuts. And gosh, I'll spend, I'll go 14 hours straight one day just knocking out music. And I finally go back to the top, hit play, see how far I've gotten, and maybe 35 measures of music out of maybe 150 have only been finished. And I'm thinking, like, oh my goodness, I've gotten almost nowhere. That's less than a minute, and I've got 3 minutes to finish on this thing, like by tomorrow afternoon. And the pace of motion picture, or I guess the pace of post-production never changes. Like delivery dates are still delivery dates. You just have to work so much harder for comedy. Right,
I get you. I haven't got this written down yet. It's just something that occurred to me. With Haymaker, part of the plot is that there's a musician involved. Does that make your job easier or more difficult, having to work around the musicians?
In this one, it didn't really affect much of anything. The director, Nick Sasso, he really wanted Nomi's songs and some of the other featured artists to exist just where they were. And then
Right.
my job was to do something completely different. And he was like, most of the movie, people aren't going to understand why that really subtle, orchestral textures in the background, that violin solo comes in. It's not till halfway through the film we're going to understand why we're using that music. But he was like, really separate that out. Just only play the deeper, unspoken qualities in the subtext of these characters. And so it was really easy to just separate myself from it in this case. So it was actually just a breeze on this movie. It's not always that good.
No, I can imagine. No, that did remind me of something that I remember being told back in school. So that, again, back in the 60s, 70s, one of the teachers said about the thing with music soundtracks and scores and things is that if they're really good, you don't notice them because they just blend in with all the action and things like that. So I think, that must hurt for a musician. People walk out and say, "What do you think of the soundtrack?" Oh, was the sound to it? I never noticed that. I was just so engrossed in the whole experience. And then when you sit down and listen or close your eyes and I think, "Oh God, yeah, there's some really good music going on here." Anyway, but
yeah,
right. So, what do you always want film directors, to know that they might not usually understand when it comes to the music process, the writing, composing process?
Oh wow, that's one of those really good questions. It's like,
I got one in, great.
What do I want them to know? I think one thing I used to wish was that they would understand. And I can't emphasize enough, used to wish this, that they would understand a little more about what the production process for music really was and why a creative schedule for a composer is not compatible whatsoever to a production schedule on a film. And for us, it's just like a monumental feat of keeping up, producing music of a certain quality at that speed. Is just unthinkable. And that's why most composers drift into film music for a bit, and then they just run away screaming. Not too long after. Not a lot of us stick this out. And I just happen to be somebody who realized, I can keep up. I don't mind the circus of this. In fact, I enjoy it more than I expected I would. And that's what I think a lot of composers early on think, like, if they only understood. But really, the production schedule is never going to change. And it just never seemed like a valid issue to have. And so what I realized makes my job a lot easier and much more effective musically is when filmmakers decide to forget trying to talk to me like a musician. Right. I found I get right to the heart of a great score, and some of them have even tried to study up on music before talking to me, and it only sets us back, significantly back. I don't need to know more about what a type of harmony or an instrument sounds like. I know those things. So communicating to me about, let's try E-bowing a guitar, or hey, what's a 5-chord? Let's put one of those in. And I've gotten stuff like that. But really what helps me is, let's just talk about it with everyday language and just direct me into the heart of what you want me to follow in that scene. Like, okay, we're moving along. Whose perspective am I on? What are we feeling? Or am I playing something else that we don't see? Like, really lead me deep into the subtext of a scene, just normal everyday conversation. And the more filmmakers give up trying to talk to me like a composer, the better the music turns out. And in the last 15 years, I've noticed that's the key quality that really brings the best of my work out, is just to forget music, just talk to me like another writer, or like you're directing me as an actor through the scene. Yeah. Put me in that place, and then I can get it. Yeah.
Brilliant. All right. Okay. So roughly how early in the editing process would you want the composer to be brought in? Is it right at the beginning, part way through? Have you got something to compose to?
Yeah. Film scores need to be composed to picture. Mm-hmm. Ideally the picture-locked picture, where after the editors are done, trimming frames here and there, then they finally have that final lock, stamp a time code print on there, and then we're all talking about the same timing markers for everything in the movie. And but for me, I like to see footage as early as possible. Right. And I won't be scoring anything to it, but I have this really uncomfortable conversation with filmmakers early in the process before they're done shooting. often I meet a filmmaker, they want to bring me in, especially if it's one I haven't worked with before. I have to prepare them for a difficult chat, because what usually happens is, great, we're happy to have you on the film. Production starts in a few months. Here's a script, get to know the story. And then I have to say, you know what? I would prefer not to read the script. And I have to brace them like, you're not going to like this next comment from me, but I would really prefer not to read it. And they're like, okay, I'm hearing you. Now tell me why you don't want to read the most important foundational thing of us going in.
Yeah.
And for me, it's when I start reading a script, I began to imagine a movie in my head. I begin to see an edit. I begin to see how wide the cameras work and actors' performances. And I start to hear music. And when the actual movie the director sees is shot, and I begin to see the footage come in, and it's nothing like the movie I saw in my head. And then I have to break away from these preconceived ideas. So I try to look at the footage as early as possible to see what the reality of the movie is. Like, what did they actually shoot? How are they seeing this? How is the performance really? Like, is there a rhythm in this that I should tap into early? And then I allow myself to just start thinking. And by the time the edit's ready, I have a pretty good idea of where to go.
Right. I suppose leading on from that, one of the questions I've got is, if you could change anything about the industry, what would it be?
Just a few more weeks of composing time. Just
more time.
Just a little more time. That would just make all the difference for what I would want out of it. Just to have a little more flex time to develop the material a little more. I don't mind composing fast. I would just love another 2 weeks of back and forth with a filmmaker and just keep refining a good thing to something even better.
Fair enough. So, what's the best advice you've ever been given, either in music or in music for film?
Wow. Oh, I've never been asked that.
Number 2.
Yeah, you've got 2 dunks in on me today. Gosh, there's a lot of advice I have, but one that's been on my mind for a little while would probably be this. Just don't follow trends. Don't follow with what all the other composers think they should be doing or what they think you should be doing.
Yeah.
I think some of my biggest creative setbacks for a long time, especially early on, were thinking I needed to sound like a film composer, in air quotes, be more the industry standard. And all that ever gets you is a fast track to invisibility and being infinitely replaceable. And when I started getting my first meetings with major motion picture studio heads, they all had one complaint. And it was everything was homogenizing. No composer was daring enough to be a little different. And they wanted something new, not just more Hans Zimmer and John Williams. And I thought, my survival is going to depend on this. I cannot be invisible. And then I began to just lean on the most unique parts of my musical history. And then a really unique sound began to emerge. And that's when they started coming to me for my sound. And that was a big turning point. And everyone gets the opposite advice these days. And I cannot, it's not like I just came up with this on my own. It was the complaint at CBS, Fox, Disney. They all were like, don't bring me more of the same. Be something worth listening to. And so I just can't advise composers enough to find a different way.
Plough your own furrow.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So this is something that I remember asking a friend of mine who used to play in a pub band and things, because he was a chemistry teacher by day, but he was a rock and roll singer at night, and he was vaguely musical. He said, how do you actually make up a tune? What is the creative process? Because it's alchemy. It's
ineffable, yeah.
To me, it's how do you just come up with a tune?
Yeah, the best ones, I don't think you really work out. They show up for no particular reason.
Yeah.
And then I look back and try to figure out why it's working. And I analyze things a little bit after the fact. I'll be struck with a theme, and then I realize that's a winner right there. Why? How did this show up? And often I usually can't answer why it showed up, but I can look back after I've put it down on paper and see what works. But really, there are ways you can reliably muscle your way into a good melody. there are common things about them and great rules for, because melodies are something that live in horizontal time. They move forward, and when something moves forward in psychological time, they need to have contour, shapes, leaps, steps, and there's a formula for balancing those, and then there's particular notes in a scale that if you ground a lot of the melody on them, it'll be stronger than not. But that said, a lot of the greatest tunes blatantly violate those rules for success, though. So there's something else that happens that is more magic than not. And so for me, I'm usually outside and not at a computer. I have to leave the studio, go for a jog, walk around, and then the melody catches me. And there's something to that. Most composers I know would say the same. They're in the shower, and then they're like, oh, wow, they're drawing 5 lines in the steam, trying to transcribe it really quick against the glass. And I can relate to that. It is a bit magic when it just happens.
Yeah, it's a bit like the old Freddie Mercury thing. He used to have a piano behind him, and he used to be able to play it at night when he woke up. So talking of other famous musicians, which ones do you admire? Who's your favourite? I mean, I'm an old, back in the day, prog rock fan. I hold my hands up. Genesis, yes. Jethro Tull, all that. What do you listen to for enjoyment?
For enjoyment, so not necessarily my professional influences, but for fun.
You get home at night, you've done a hard day's work, you just want to chill. What do you listen to?
Oh gosh, yeah. In the last several years, I've really fallen in love with this French electro swing band called Caravan Palace.
Oh wow!
And to me, it's electro swing sounded just like an abomination. It sounded like everything I don't like about where music is going these days. But their music is, even though there's kind of like a club beat under a lot of their tunes, it's very harmonically sophisticated, very melodic, and it's all rooted in 1920s swing conventions. And so you get really great, guitar, like a lot of Django-y 1930s, 20s guitar solos, clarinet licks, and it's just so fun. I love them. And then if I'm trying to just mellow out, I love Melody Gardot. Just a combination of just this classical and jazz thing. And her story's so unique. She fell into music after being hit by a car and not being able to speak for a year. And just her brain had reconfigured around music during her recovery process. And she doesn't have a big, powerful voice, I think, from some of the damage she sustained, but discovered something truly beautiful and unique. And I just can't get enough of her music.
Right. Well, I've just been scribbling those notes down. I shall have a look at those on Apple Music when I've finished. Yeah. So, talking of which, how do you feel the internet has affected the music business?
Yes, it has.
It has, I know that. I mean, because I can remember back in the, a few years ago thinking, oh, look, I can download all these things and going through me Guinness Book of Hit singles. Oh, yeah, I remember that. I wonder if it's out there, So, how else has it affected it? Good, bad?
A combination.
Yeah.
The thing, streaming platforms are quick to remind us about is the scale of the reach we have just as individuals now. Yes, that's true. And it's a great way to distract from the conversation about the fact, you can have millions of streams hit and still make less than $1 on the use of that music. And so that is something new. We definitely feel that. Recent generations of young musicians have never known a world different than this. And they've come into the music industry playing the game as is, and they're not going to expect a different one. So whether that will just be another nail in the coffin or not, I don't know. Often, newer generations come into the scene as is, but then they find a new way to monetize or make something out of it. So I'm wondering when kids, 15, 20 years younger than me are going to come along, recraft this model in their image and make it work for them and the rest of us. So I could feel dismal, but I also never underestimate the ingenuity of new generations. No. But gosh, my music is just stolen and used constantly. I was once someone once ripped a track off the internet from me. It got placed in a film overseas. Then I got a notice that it was a lawsuit threatening to sue me for having stolen that track. And then I sent the original Pro Tools sessions and the scores for it that I recorded 10 years before. And then they realized, oh, our composer stole this from you. Our apologies. We'll handle this ourselves. And people will download my albums, repackage them, relabel the tracks, and sell them again online, put them on streaming platforms. And so I'm sure it's a 12-year-old kid overseas who doesn't know any better about how music copyrights work, who's doing the most of this. And I'm not always assuming malevolence in all of these things, but but the system is broken down, and I just don't rely on my music working for me. I am a workhorse. I sustain myself by going from job to job because there's still jobs to be done. So
I know what you mean about the next generations and everything, because I see my 7-year-old granddaughter. Can I just borrow your phone a bit, Gampy? I'm thinking, I didn't know that I could do that. And she's just amazing.
Absolutely.
It's the thing is, ultimately, it's not new to them. It's what they used to. So, hey ho. So, as a composer, you get presumably offers to make different film scores. Apart from the need to make money, okay, what makes you decide which film you want to score?
It's usually a few things. Sometimes it's not even about money. I think one of the, last year, one of the films I worked on that by far has gotten the most attention and has really brought the most people back to me was something I just saw. There was going to be no money in it, but the artistic opportunity was so significant, I just couldn't say no. So sometimes it's just the sheer weight of what that film is going to do or say, or the artistic gratification just as a composer I need from a project. I'll take a job on those merits alone sometimes. Sometimes it's not even so much the quality of the movie, but the environment, but the people in the production and what they're trying to do means a lot to me. I believe in those individuals. And so I'll jump on the film because I see something really wonderful at work with all those people. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's like we have a really big show. We can absolutely pay, what you're asking, and we need it done quickly. And it's like, well, now I get to pay rent. So that's a fine merit as well. Those tend to be the three things that come along. Yeah, absolutely.
So is there anybody in your life that inspires you to make music? Is there anybody, when you're plucking one of these tunes out of nowhere, which you somehow managed to do, that you're thinking of at the time?
Yeah. Sometimes if I'm trying to really get in the zone for a film, I'll look at the picture and I'll see, oh, it's interesting. They use a lot of really wide shots. The edit is very gradual. They're leaning into certain colors more than others. And those colors bring up certain palettes of sound in my head. And I'm thinking, it's a little bit like this French composer I used to listen to, Francis Poulenc, and it has a little bit of that Balinese. I always think Balinese gamelans or whatever. Yeah. When I see those pictures, in fact, I've got some gamelan instruments up here. Yeah, and I was thinking, a lot of reds and yellows, and I think of gamelan, and so then I'll just absorb music from those sources, and then just let something arise later. I absorb music, let it sit for a while, and then it'll churn into something new after sitting for a bit. If you start composing right away after absorbing music, you'll just end up copying somebody. But there's this, who was it? There's some major writer of musicals, I can't remember exactly who it was, who would do that. They would soak in a lot of music, let it sit for a few weeks, reapproach the project, and then the spirit of that music seems to naturally emanate through your writing later. Mm-hmm. So I'll absorb it, try to speak in the voice of that era or that sound a little bit. I guess is how I would characterize it.
Fantastic. So I suppose this next question is going to be, it's a bit like how long is a piece of string? How long does it take you to come up with the right score for a film? You're watching the thing. How quickly can you bang out a tune for us now? Come on.
If I only have 2 weeks, then it'll happen in 2 weeks, and they get what they get. That is the fastest I've scored a film. And luckily it wasn't a big score. Was, I probably needed, it might have been 30, 35 minutes tops in that film. And it was small string orchestra, just some guitars, little other elements here. So it was something you could knock out at that speed. And they had no time for notes. It was, is it close enough? Good, it's on. And they were just green-lighting everything. I was told to tone one scene down in that movie. They're like, okay, we're not storming the castle, but there's this kid getting picked on. Save the John Williams for later. And so I just scaled it back a little bit. I remember that was their notes of me. But I was recording with the orchestra in Seattle, and I was going to stay for a few extra days to watch some of the mixing begin. And then this next film got bumped up. Like, hey, we have a big change in schedule. We need you to hurry back. But ideally, 6 weeks is a little more comfortable. But I miss the days of having at least 3 months to do a film score. That felt a little. I mean, if you have 80 minutes of music to write for a movie, 3 months makes it very manageable on a day-to-day basis. You know, 6 to 8 weeks. You know, you're writing 8 minutes of music a day, and I bet you can guess how meaningful 8 minutes of music a day is going to be. That's TV. That's like TV composing. Yeah. You're just trying to survive. There's no. You really don't get that process of digging deep into the music. You're just staying on top of new tracks and making fixes. So. Yeah.
Are there any films that you wish you could go back and rescore?
Almost all of them, yeah. Some of them I wouldn't touch again. There's a few that, in cases like those, where there's a few projects I fell in love with while I was scoring them, and I couldn't believe we only had 4 to 6 weeks on that. And I just wish I could have given so much more of my soul to them. I was ready to really give my whole self to it. Except for the fact it was all for them and for myself. It was just about surviving. Yeah, and we got close enough. And I was actually really happy with a few of those. But I just don't like. I just hate the thought of being limited by those schedules. But I'm also happy that they were so happy with the music afterward. Anyway.
Oh, good.
So, but that's usually the case. I would just love to give it a little more magic than we had time for.
Yeah, I suppose leading on from which of your pieces of music are you most proud of? Which would you look back so far? Because I'm sure there's years more to come. But what you've done so far, what do you look back on and think that was good? I like that.
Out of film scores, there are a few standouts. In fact, Haymaker might be one of them.
Oh, it's good.
Because it was one of those cases where we had time. I was in no rush. Right. And we just had months of artistic back and forth, and I was reconfiguring it over. And we just refined it into what it is. And it was a lot of simplifying down, and I just love that Nick just took the leash off and let me do all the exploring, and I would bring him back my most inspired findings, and we would just refine from there. And I think it shows in the music. And maybe Haymaker, plus I would say there's another film I finished in 2017, an animated film actually called Moose, that with Kathy Bates, Samuel L. Jackson. And, It's a short little project, but it had a great big orchestra recording. It was not one of those comedy animations. It was very. It's almost a film about Black Lives Matter, except told through a moose and a kid in the forest, and digging into that score. It was the same process. We had time. They got to really let me bring my gospel background into this movie, and something magic in that process happened that none of us quite understood, but we ended up with something that I am infinitely happy with. Yeah, absolutely. I would say Moose and maybe Haymaker recently. Yeah.
Brilliant. Right. So, excuse me. While we've been talking, you've mentioned a few composers: Hans Zimmer, John Barry, John Williams. Yeah. Given the choice, is there anybody you would really, really give you an arm to collaborate with?
Oh, wow. Yeah, they've long gone.
Yeah, okay.
Bernard Herrmann,
Yeah.
Nina Rota. Today, Danny Elfman or Bruno
I love
Coulet.
Danny Elfman. Sorry.
That's more my speed.
Yeah.
I'm much more like, Bernard Herrmann, Nina Rota, Michel Legrand, Danny Elfman. This is a continuation of a type of thinker, and these are the composers that shaped me from Herrmann through Elfman in my development. And I knew I was one of them, not a John Williams or Hans Zimmer. And I've always been a little more offbeat in the industry. And they were the composers who gave me the courage to really be myself. I thought, if they can do it, like, that's the road I want to take. And so since Danny's the only living one, maybe Bruno Coulet as well. That's more my speed, Yeah.
Oh,
one of them.
I'd pay money to listen to a collaboration between you and Danny Elfman. Yeah. So
would I.
So if you weren't a composer, what would you be doing now?
Wow. Oh my goodness. Well, I did get 2 other non-music degrees, and I don't even know that's what I would want to do. I studied foreign policy and international relations, but I don't know that I'd really be called to that. I think I would probably have gone to medical school. I didn't think I was smart enough to do it as a kid. And after I'd finished grad school, and after I'd gone through all my music, political science, and then my graduate degree in music, I realized maybe I was capable, and I just never believed I was. No one ever really told me I might actually be good at it. And there was a year I spent studying physics and astronomy because I had several degrees worth of courses, but none of my science requirements. So I studied physics and astronomy for a year, and I survived it just fine. And I thought, I had never realized I could do science. And when that stewed with me for a few years. And after I was becoming established as a composer, I realized, I would love to treat people. I would probably be a physician of some kind.
Right.
Yeah, I would go to medical school. I still think about it, actually. Yeah. I just turned 39 yesterday. I'm very close to 40. I don't know if it's a good idea to start medical school now. But it's always inspired me, the thought of becoming a doctor.
Well, when I was, straight out of school, I trained as a teacher. Then I went into further education, and then there was a political upheaval. I ended up in social services. And then there was another political upheaval. I was made redundant, and I ended up working as a pharmacy dispenser. So I ended up the rest of my working life in community pharmacy. So things changed. That was when I was in my 50s when I changed. So yeah, you can always change. You can always change. Yeah.
I won't be surprised either. My parents went through things like that, where they trained in music and ended up one in education, one in business. Yeah. And life just does things. And I'm enjoying this music life, but I have no idea what the future is. So
I think it's more important to say what's next rather than what happened. So
that is probably some of the best advice anybody could ever have. Most people spend a lot of time in shock when really adapting is simply the better path forward. Yeah. I've been there too.
Well, you're doing all right out of it now, if you don't mind me saying. We're coming up to the end. I mean, I think it's about 40 minutes Zoom allows us before it kicks us out. But so we're getting near to the end of that. It's been fascinating. So, and I've got through all my questions apart from what's next, which you will have had before. What's next? What projects have you got coming up?
Wow, I'm working on a couple concert commissions. One for my publisher, a piece for string orchestra and solo guitar. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm in the middle of right now. And I actually spent the whole pandemic working on a masterclass in film scoring. And I was in production over all summer long, and we edited through the fall. And that's about to launch, and it's one of these things that we're going to have scoring sessions for people who with session orchestras in Hollywood for people who jump in. So since everything has slowed down so much, I thought, I'm going to going to offer some opportunities to upcoming composers. So,
oh, brilliant.
About to launch the new series. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is great. That's giving something back. Oh, excuse me, ding. Yeah, well, Chris Thomas, thank you. As I said at the beginning, it's totally different for me because you
Good.
are moving in spheres that I can't even begin to understand. But it's been fantastic. You've been really interested, thoroughly enjoyed it. And I remember years and years ago, I think it was in primary school, I went to a concert and it was given by Muir Matheson, and for years I kept seeing his name coming up on films. This music conducted by Muir Matheson. I shall be looking out for your name on every film that I see from now on.
Yeah, keep watching.
Okay, so again, thank you very much, Chris. It's been a fantastic 40-odd minutes, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with next.
Well, it's been so fun chatting. I really appreciate getting to talk to you.
Oh, well, thank you for your time. Okay.
All right, absolutely.
Okay, take care now.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye now.